So I've got this massive list, thousands and thousands of video games released over the last 50 years. At first glance, it just looks like a giant, messy pile of data. But what if it's more than that? What if, hidden inside all these titles and dates, is the secret story of how we play? Let's dig in and see what we can find.
You see the dates and titles just flashing by, right? Like here, 1986. The Legend of Zelda, an absolute icon, is born on the Famicom disk system over in Japan.
Okay, let's jump forward a bit. 1997, we get Wingover, a flight simulator on the PlayStation. A totally different machine, a totally different feel. And we keep going, all the way to 2012. Now we're looking at an action game, Asura's Wrath, on the Xbox 360, this time released in the US. And then into the super recent past, 2020, with a game called Slap Kings. Okay, released worldwide on the iPad. The names, the years, the devices, they just keep coming, one after another. So what is all this? I mean, is it just a random list of digital distractions? Or, if we look a little closer, could this data actually tell us the story of gaming itself? The secret history of how our entertainment has completely transformed? All right, let's start at the beginning. Chapter 1 of our story is all about gaming's incredible journey, from these giant room-sized computers straight into our living rooms. You can actually see the first big shift right here in the data. Back in 1978, a game like Shoot was being played on a massive mainframe computer. But then, just a few years later, in 1981, you get the Game & Watch, a game you could literally hold in your hands. And by '86, with Zelda on the NES, it's official. Gaming has conquered the living room. It went from a shared curiosity to something that was yours. And you know, a really clear pattern starts to show up when you look at the data from this era. If you ask where all this amazing innovation was coming from, the answer is just overwhelming. It was Japan. The NES, the Famicom, the Game Boy, these foundational experiences that pretty much defined a generation were almost all Japanese creations. And that brings us to our next chapter. So once that foundation was set, man, the floodgates just blew open. The market didn't just grow, it exploded into this all-out war of competing hardware. Just take a look at one single year, 1997. The data shows complete fragmentation. I mean, to play just these 4 games, you needed 3 different systems. If you had a Sega Saturn, sorry, you couldn't play PlayStation's Wingover. This was the peak of the platform wars, where the console you begged your parents for to find your entire gaming library. You had to choose a side. And the battlefield was seriously crowded. This wasn't just a 2 or 3 horse race. The data from the 90s and early 2000s is just littered with platforms. We're talking TurboGrafx, SNES, DOS, PlayStation, the N64, Windows, GameCube. It was an explosion of choice for us players, but a huge, huge challenge for developers. But something else was expanding too, and that was the map. While Japan was still an absolute powerhouse, the data now shows these huge releases coming from the United States, from the United Kingdom, and even from Poland with a game called Electroman back in 1992 for DOS. The secret of how to make games was officially out. This leads us to what might be the biggest disruption in the entire story, a change so fundamental it would rewrite all the rules we've just talked about. I'm talking about the move from physical boxes to digital bits. The internet had arrived, and it was about to change everything. And the proof is right here, hidden in the language of the data itself. The old entries say things like NES version or retail release. But look at the modern entries. Now they say download release, Steam release, itch.io release, early access. We just stopped going to the store to buy a cartridge and started clicking a button instead. And of course, this digital shift opened up a brand new front in the platform wars. The phones that were suddenly in all of our pockets. All of a sudden, the data is just filled with iPhone version and Android version releases. Games like Pop-Up Killer or Pocket Stables, these weren't for a console you kept at home. They were for the device you carried with you everywhere. And check this out. Look at the release location for these new digital and mobile games. The data overwhelmingly says one thing, over and over again: worldwide. The internet didn't just change how we buy games, it completely erased the borders. No more waiting months for a game to finally come out in your country. Release days suddenly became a global event. So, after this incredible journey, we have to ask, what's next? Where does all this data suggest we're headed in the ongoing story of how we play? When you boil it all down, the history hidden in this giant list is really a story about access, and it happens in 4 simple steps. Gaming went from being tied to a huge mainframe, to a dedicated box in our living rooms, then to a device in our pockets, and now, thanks to the internet, it's just everywhere.
And get this story is far from over. This list of games we've been picking apart isn't just a history book, it already has titles scheduled for release as far out as 2025. This whole story is still being written right now, and these trends, they're only speeding up.
Which leaves us with one last, really fascinating question. For an industry that has already gone from giant computers to conquer every single screen we own, our TVs, our PCs, our phones, what frontier is possibly left? What's the next place we're all going to learn to play?